Hello, everyone. Welcome to this edition of English Skills One. Once again, yesterday, I hope that you have seen yesterday's edition. Yesterday's edition, we had F.R. Lewis. Today, we are going into formalism. And Dr. Prasanth is with us to tell us more about formalism. Dr. Prasanth, thank you very much for coming in. Over to you, Dr. Prasanth.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Premanand. Welcome once again to our new edition. Now we are moving from individual writers to a group or maybe a school of thought rather than individual, which is consisted of number of different writers. Until now, we were actually moving on with individual critics, right from Plato and Aristotle up to F.R. Lewis. Now we are moving to a school of thought where different people contribute to the same ideology. This video will be slightly longer because we have so much to discuss. So without wasting much time, let me just move straight away to the syllabus. Key features of formalism, its origin, focus on language, form, literariness, defamiliarization, that is a technique, fabula and sujet will have to be explained, motivation, again a critical terminology term, which we need to explain further. This is, as introduction, I would like to tell you that it's a critical practice, not done by an individual critic, but by a group of writers that focuses on the formal and structural features of a text. Right from beginning of criticism or analysis, a text can be broadly divided into its form and content. Form refers to the stylistic features and content refers to the meaning side. And until formalism, majority of the critics in the past focused on the content side. And criticism until formalism was a kind of a evaluation. It was normally described as hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is a biblical terminology meaning explanation. So the purpose of criticism until formalism was to explain the content. Explanation of the text was given more predominance or prominence than the stylistic features. For in the formalism, as the term indicates, the emphasis shifts from content to form. So you have a name called formalism. It is a method of reading a text by focusing on syntax, grammar, literary devices, and leaving out, opting out cultural, social, and historical context. So let us let me remind you of the practices of I.A. Richards and F.R. Lewis in the classroom, where they used to give a text, preferably a poem, to the students to observe or make comments on that. And this is the primarily or fundamentally, this is a practice which actually has taken up by formalists. They erase the socio-cultural historical context and focus only on the given text, especially not the meaning side, but how the text is formed, what kind of design, what kind of pattern is employed, how is the syntax done, how the grammar or literary devices are explained, rather than what is there in the poem or what is there in the text. The name derived from the concentration of form of work of art. So we call it formalism, emphasis on form. It is, without saying, a reaction against romantic ideology, because romanticism basically believed that literature is part of a poetic creation, is part of a subjective activity. That of the creation happens when the artist or maybe the poet undergoes a special kind of a situation, a kind of a trance. So that is put into creative faculty of the author at the highest pedestal. So they reduced, I would say, the creativity to the author, to the subject. So it is a reaction against romantic ideology. Challenge the concepts like literature is a mirror held up to nature. Aristotelian concepts like it's a mirror held up to nature, which I think I have explained earlier with respect to Aristotle, and he insisted that it is a linguistic dislocation enabling aesthetic experience. So we'll have to address this further in the subsequent slides. It is a linguistic activity. Writing is a linguistic activity. It is not a creative activity. So it all depends what kind of language is employed, what kind of words are employed in this particular text. And you erase all other references with respect to the text. Formalism had two distinctive schools, and we will be looking at both. Today, we are looking at Russian formalism and its Anglo-American, British-American version called New Criticism, which we'll be looking at in the next class or in our syllabus. New Criticism is, and New Criticism and formalism are just two sides of the same coin, right? In Russia, we call it New Criticism, which happened much earlier than the New Criticism, which almost initiated in England and America during the 30s, 1930s, 1930. Whereas formalism originated some 10, 15 years before. And you can also read my shorter slide on my left by taking a screenshot. I don't have time, in fact, to explain all that. This explanation has a kind of a sequel with respect to the shorter slides. Russian formalism was enforced in Russia in the first 3 decades of 20th century, almost starting from 1895 to almost 1930. Two organizations responsible. One was Society for the Study of Poetic Language. And what you see in capital letter is a Russian word. I don't know how to pronounce this word. And OPOJAS is the acronym standing for Society for the Study of Poetic Language, right? Because when it is translated in English, it becomes SSPL. Well, on the other hand, when it is originally coined in Russian language, it was read as OPOJAS, but the pronunciation is actually, I'm not very familiar with the Russian language. Founded by Viktor Shklovsky in 1916 and associated by Boris Echenbaum. So these are the two writers responsible for the Society for the Study of Poetic Language, Viktor Shklovsky, we have to remember the names, and Boris Echenbaum, and the Moscow Linguistic Circle with Philip Fortunato and in 1914 and supported by Roman Jakobson. So the three names I would say, or the four names I would say, with you have to be a bit familiar with is Viktor Shklovsky, number one, Boris Echenbaum, number two, Philip Fortunato, maybe pronunciation may be slightly vary. And Roman Jakobson is the most important figure among all this because he actually sustained the Russian formalism or formalist practices even after the formalism had actually died down. And Vladimir Prop is another significant contributor. And when you go for PG, definitely you will have Vladimir Prop and Roman Jakobson in the syllabus. They wanted to impart a scientific precision to literary criticism. So there is a first-time attempt. I mean, earlier we said that even Matthew Arnold attempted to make literary criticism closer to science, but he was not very successful then. Formalism, for the first time, made criticism somewhat precise, accurate to the level of science by means of the study of the formal and structural patterns in the work of art. Instead of the content which we normally discuss, even after when you watch a movie, we discuss the story. Normally, a person after watching a movie may not discuss editing or maybe the BGM or the background score or anything like that. So normally, our intention initially will be to discuss the theme. Similarly, criticism in the past had been discussing the theme, the content. Now we have shifted to the formal and structural patterns, emphasize the form and ignore the content. This is what is the reversal that has happened with respect to formalism. A work of art is viewed as a specialized mode of language. This, I think, can be traced back to I. Richards, who said two kinds of meaning, and even F.R. Lewis, right? So they viewed poetic language fundamentally different from the practical language used for communication. This is the point I made yesterday with respect to F.R. Lewis, and day before yesterday with respect to I. Richards. So they said, or they viewed literary language different from the language that we use for ordinary purposes or day-to-day purposes. The process of making the language work as the process uh, of a work of art deliberately is complex and deviant. The process of making the language of a work of art deliberately complex and deviant, designated as defamiliarization by Shklovsky, enhances the artistic experience by changing our automatic perception into a offbeat one. A very long sentence, we'll cut it into three. The process of making the language of work of art deliberately complex and deviant. So what formalism or the practices of formalism made was they made the language look so different, so complicated, so deviant. Because very simple, the moment you use a language or a word in a day-to-day conversation, it usually carries just one meaning. And in our day-to-day conversation, we make or we take special care not to be, not to sound ambiguous. Okay, so that meaning the moment I wanted to communicate something to my son or my friend, I make it as simple as possible, as clear as possible. How I do that? I find the perfect equivalent word so that there is no confusion. But in the form of literature, this particular process is made very complex so that even a single line or a single expression will generate more than one meaning. By making language complex and deviant, which is actually is a concept of formalism, which is called defamiliarization, which we'll be explaining further in the next slide. So this is called a process of defamiliarization. And you remember me telling about Coleridge when Coleridge said the purpose of art is to making remote familiar and familiar remote. Right? Defamiliarization is you make something familiar remote. So this is exactly what Shklovsky called about uh, defamiliarization. I'll be explaining defamiliarization in my next slide. So it enhances the artistic experience. The moment it is enhanced, this kind of additional meaning is given to a particular expression. It enhances the experience of because it changes from the automatic perception into a offbeat one. That is, you normally expect a particular thing to happen, just like a twist in the movie or a kind of a spoiler in the movie, where you expect the movie or the story to go in one particular direction. Suddenly, there is a twist, it changes. Similarly, when you expect a particular word to be used in a poem, suddenly you come across another word and it creates a kind of a confusion or maybe multiple or multiplicity of meaning. When there is a multiplicity or ambiguity of meaning is generated, the text becomes tense. You cannot easily make out what exactly is that, and this is a deliberate process. So the automatic perception or expected perception of a work of art is thwarted or challenged. And this is how they bring in a concept called defamiliarization. And formalism aims at developing a science of literature with linguistics as a base. So they were actually drawn towards the theory of Ferdinand de Saussure on structuralist principles, which we will be taking up later next year in the fifth semester for you. So they were actually closer to the Saussurian terminology of linguistics, and literature is made of language. So because why they have taken up linguistics as a bridge towards criticism or towards analysis is that literature is finally basically the language component. This is the argument of Boris Eschenbach. Literature is linguistically autonomous and independent of socio-historical context. So they argue that literature is basically linguistics, words, which are independent of any socio-economic, political conditions or contexts. How is equally important as what literature says. So there is a first time focus on how part rather than the what part. What part is a meaning, how part is a form. So there is a first time focus on the form in the history of literary criticism. And they also talk about, there are the few terms which I would like you to be familiar with respect to formalism. Number one, literariness, first used by Roman Jacobson to denote the linguistic and formal elements that go into the making of a literary work. It's called literariness. It is nothing but the quality of language to denote something other than that is expected. Literariness of the text, in the sense that it does not denote something which is obviously referred to, because any point of time language is uses a referential system. You refer to something. See, I need to tell you something very basic about even Saussure today, because when Saussure described a word as a image or a symbol, the word has actually the word used by Saussure was sign, sign. And this particular sign consists of two elements. One is a signifier, another is signified. Together, signifier and signified together will constitute the sign. Meaning signifier is the word and signified is the meaning. So the form and content has to come together to generate. Because if I say a word in Arabic, maybe, or in Persian, or maybe in Latin, majority of you will not understand because you are not familiar with the language. So a few of you might understand it. Why you don't understand is that there is a no universal one-to-one correspondence between the word and its meaning. In Malayalam, നമ്മൾ പുലി എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് നമ്മളിപ്പോൾ റെഫർ ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു ആനിമലിനെയാണ്. ഇനി ആ ആനിമലിനെ നമ്മൾ എലി എന്നായിരുന്നു പറഞ്ഞിരുന്നെങ്കിൽ, ഈ എലി എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ നമ്മൾ ആരും പേടിക്കാത്തതും, ഇപ്പൊ എലി എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ ആരും പേടിക്കില്ല, പുലി എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ പേടിക്കും. അത് അങ്ങോട്ടും ഇങ്ങോട്ടും റിവേഴ്സ് ചെയ്താലും പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് മാറ്റമൊന്നുമില്ല. അതായത് വാക്കുകൾക്ക് അതിൻ്റെ വസ്തുവായിട്ട് യാതൊരു ബന്ധവുമില്ല. ഇത് സോഷ്യലുടെ ഒരു പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട തിയറിയാണ്. നമ്മൾ ഈ തിയറിക്ക് പൊതുവായിട്ട് സോഷ്യലുടെ അടിസ്ഥാനപരമായിട്ടുള്ള രണ്ട് തിയറി, ആർബിട്രറി എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ഒരു സാധനമാണ്. സിഗ്നിഫയർ ആൻഡ് സിഗ്നിഫയർ constitute a sign, and sign and the object that it refers to is arbitrary എന്നുള്ള ഒരു തിയറി ഉണ്ട്. So similarly, literariness is what is constituted only by language. It's a kind of an apparent reality. Just like you see a movie where there is no person, but only a reflection of light. Next. Just I'm making a quote. The object of the literary science is not literature, but literariness. It is not literature, but it is literariness, the language component. That is, what make a given work a literary work? What makes a given work a literary work? So what makes a literary work is the literariness. Meaning, the language that is used in a particular work of art creates a kind of a pseudo reality, a referential reality to which you relate. Just like you watch a movie and at times you cry responding to the movie. Why do you cry, or why do you emotionally respond or respond? Your response is emotional. നമ്മൾ ചില സമയത്ത് കരയും, ചില സമയത്ത് നമ്മൾ ഭയങ്കരമായിട്ട് ചിരിക്കും. പരിസരം മറന്നിട്ട് നമ്മൾ പ്രതികരിക്കും സിനിമയായിട്ട്. നമുക്ക് എല്ലാവർക്കും അറിയാം സിനിമ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ആളുകൾ പ്രൊഫഷണലായിട്ട് അഭിനയിക്കുന്നതാണ്. യഥാർത്ഥത്തിൽ ഇവർക്ക് ദുഃഖമില്ല, ഈ കഥാപാത്രത്തിന് മാത്രമാണ് ദുഃഖമുള്ളത്, ആക്ടർക്ക് ദുഃഖമില്ല, ആക്ടർ കാശ് വാങ്ങിയിട്ടാണ് അഭിനയിക്കുന്നത്. ഇതൊക്കെ അറിയെങ്കിലും നമ്മൾ ഇമോഷണലി റെസ്പോണ്ട് ചെയ്യും. അതെന്തുകൊണ്ടാ വെച്ചാൽ ഒരു മേക്ക് ബിലീവ് സിസ്റ്റം ഉണ്ടാക്കുന്നുണ്ടാണ്. You for the time you believe that this is something very real. So similarly, a literariness is created in a work of literature because what is given supersedes what is actually the meaning side. So what makes a work literary is its formal and structural organization, not the content or imaginary power. It's purely linguistic. So a literary text is looked upon by formalists as a linguistic text, linguistic unit, without much reference to the world outside. right? They count the linguistic strategy of foregrounding. This is a technique used by, this is a second technical term. First, literariness. Number two is uh, foregrounding. And then I'll be explaining what is defamiliarization, a third concept. Foregrounding to attain literariness through defamiliarization. So I'm clubbing three concepts: foregrounding, linguistics, to attain a literariness through defamiliarization. Let me explain that. Foregrounding, actually proposed by Prague Linguistic Circle in the 30s, that is the foundation of new criticism, which I'll be explaining further when I do new criticism. Foregrounding involves the use of formal and structural elements for deviation from practical language to poetic language by making it deliberately making it very strange. So how do you foreground? So we'll explain how the foregrounding has to happen. We'll explain in the next slide. Russian formalism waned and disappeared with the rise of Joseph Stalin into power, who believed that content and message of a literary work is of utmost importance. And Marxism, on the other hand, reflected that this particular literature can be used as a tool for social change. So they could never digest the kind of abstract philosophy like formalism. So Stalin suppressed all structuralists and they all left Russia out of fear. And maybe in America, they moved and gathered together, I mean, some of them, and they created a movement called New Criticism. So defamiliarization, let us just look at that. Defamiliarization is a term coined by Shklovsky in his essay Art as Device to differentiate poetic language from ordinary language. The Russian word is, again, I am not able to pronounce that, something like ostene, translated to make strange. So it is exact translation of the Russian word. Defamiliarization is the English translation of the Russian word. It is an act of making the what is familiar unfamiliar to the readers to make it aesthetically appealing. What is very familiar to them should appear as unfamiliar. Then only they'll aesthetically respond to that. See, in any movie, taking a movie will be a better example always. See, if you present a character in a movie as too familiar a person, because there is no thrill in you, you may not be much interested because he or she is a day-to-day character whom you are so familiar with. So the moment the character is made somewhat unfamiliar, then only the interest begins. And even we are more interested to meet something which is unfamiliar, or we are interested to cherish something which is very novel, something new. Only when there is something new that is actually appreciated. And defamiliarization by employment of deviant and complex linguistic elements makes the task of creating sense a difficult one. By using experiments on linguistic elements and deviation and defamiliarization, the understanding of the text becomes a difficult one, right? So you may not make a clear sense of the text. It prevents the habitual perception by opening up new vistas of perception. So you don't understand the text just like you normally understand. So there is something esoteric, not easily understandable, and enhances the aesthetic experience of the reader. You maybe some of you will be familiar with the new wave cinema made in Kerala by Adur Gopalakrishnan, because he was spearheading that. And when you watch Adur Gopalakrishnan movie, what happens is that the normal kind of movie telling or storytelling doesn't happen. Maybe it is very slow in movie. There are so much detailing which otherwise a movie may not present. For example, a movie may not present a person actually stepping out of his house and walking 10 minutes to the workplace. But in Adur's movie, all 10 minutes, the walking is actually shown. The idea is that normally what you expect is actually thwarted. It is the other way around, it has been described. The work of art is essentially a technique that involves newer type of aesthetic language, artistic language, to alter our received perception. So what we have already received, what we have already understood, what we already expect, is actually changed into or altered into something very new by the change of language, by the change of meaning. The estrangement or distancing, thus achieved by innovative use of language, enhances the beauty and appeal of work of art. That is what they actually believe. Another very important concept they have is the concept of fabula. Fabula is Latin word for story. Is the events in a story in their chronological order. What happens first, what happens second. A kind of a plot, for example. And sujet. Sujet is a term. Sujet is spelled differently. In some texts you find SJU, said HET. Both spellings are acceptable. Sujet is a term used to designate the plot in literary narrative, the story and the plot. Right? I can tell you what is the story, difference between story and the plot. If I say king died and queen died, it's a story. If I say king died and queen died of grief, it is plot. Because in plot, different episodes are linked together. So fabula and sujet are the two terms they, as two terms of terminology they use to refer to the story and plot. Fabula itself is not the literary work, but only a material which is converted to sujet by a literary artist. So any story, the artist will take up and make it into a plot. That is, you link different episodes. Otherwise, you call it episodic. ഇപ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ ടി വി സീരിയലിനൊക്കെ പറയുന്നത് എപ്പിസോഡ് എന്നാണ്, ഓരോ എപ്പിസോഡാണ്. അങ്ങനെ കുറേ എപ്പിസോഡുകൾ അടുപ്പിച്ച് വെച്ചതാണ്. എന്നാൽ കുറേ എപ്പിസോഡുകൾ ചേർത്ത് വെച്ച ഒരു സിനിമയാവും. സിനിമയ്ക്ക് അതിൻ്റെതായിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു കണ്ടിന്യൂറ്റി വേണം, ഒന്നും മറ്റൊന്നുമായിട്ട് ലിങ്ക് ചെയ്യുക, അതാണ് ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്നത്. സോ sujet is the defamiliarized fabula. ഫാബുല ഡീഫെമിലറൈസ് ചെയ്താണ് sujet എന്നാണ് ഇവരുടെ ആർഗ്യുമെന്റ്. വളരെ പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട ആർഗ്യുമെന്റ് ആണ്. അതായത് കഥ എന്ന് പറയുന്ന കുറേ ഇൻസിഡൻസിനെ ലിങ്ക് ചെയ്ത് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ചേർത്ത് ഒരു ചെയിൻ മാതിരി ചേർത്ത് വെക്കുന്നതാണ് sujet. അതായത് കഥയെ ഡീഫെമിലറൈസ് ചെയ്യുന്നതാണ് sujet എന്നാണ് ഇവരുടെ പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട വാദം. Defamiliarization എങ്ങനെയാണ് അച്ചീവ് ചെയ്യുക? നേരത്തെ ഞാൻ അതിനെപ്പറ്റി പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് അച്ചീവ്ഡ് ബൈ ഡൈഗ്രഷൻ, interpolation. Interpolation is what you insert in between. Temporal displacements and by many other foregrounding methods. Foregrounding methods ഉണ്ട്. ഞാൻ അടുത്തതിലൊന്നുകൂടി പറയാം എന്താ foregrounding methods. Digression, interpolation, temporal displacement. അവിടെയൊക്കെ ഒരു കഥ, മെയിൻ കഥ ഇങ്ങനെ പോവുകയാണെങ്കിൽ അതിൻ്റെ ഒരു ഡയഗ്രഷൻ വരും. പിന്നെ ആ കഥ കുറച്ച് വേറെ വഴിക്ക് പോകും, അതിൽ വേറൊരു ഉപകഥ ഉണ്ടാകും. അങ്ങനെ 4-5 കഥകൾ ഒരുമിച്ച് പോവുകയും അവസാനം മാത്രം അത് തമ്മിൽ യോജിക്കുകയും ചെയ്യുന്നൊരവസ്ഥ. അപ്പോൾ അത് സാധാരണ നമ്മൾ പ്രതീക്ഷിക്കുന്ന ഒരു ഫെമിലിയർ ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു കോൺസെപ്റ്റ് നിന്ന് കുറച്ച് മാറിയിട്ടാണ്. എനിത്തിങ് ആൻഡ് എവറിത്തിങ് if it doesn't go in the line it is expected, it becomes strange. Finally, we come to motivation. Motivation is a concept envisaged by formalist critic Boris Tomaszewski. It is called, maybe my pronunciation, I don't know where I'm exactly right, Tomaszewski. A motif is the smallest unit of plot. He talks about the motif, and from there the word motivation has come. He divides motif into free and bound motifs. There are two motifs. Motif is what is recurrent, what happens again and again. Bound motifs are unit of plot which are essential to the story. They cannot be removed from plot without radically changing the narrative structure, whereas free motifs are not essential elements of plot but enhance the beauty if added. ഇപ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ സിനിമയെ കാണുമ്പോൾ അറിയാം ജഗതിയുടെ ഒരു കഥാപാത്രം, അത് ഒരു പക്ഷേ സിനിമയ്ക്ക് കാര്യമായിട്ട് കാര്യങ്ങളൊന്നും ഉണ്ടാവില്ല, അതിനടുത്ത് മാറ്റിയാലും കഥാപാത്രം മാറ്റി നിർത്തിപ്പോയാലും സിനിമ നന്നായിട്ട് മുന്നോട്ട് പോകും. പക്ഷേ കുറച്ച് തമാശയും കുറച്ച് കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ ചേർക്കാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് ഒരു കഥാപാത്രം ചേർത്തു, അതാണ് ഫ്രീ മോട്ടീവ്. Whereas the other one, that is a bound motive, is very essential to the story. That is a central part of the story. So motivation is a concept again that is the smallest unit. There are two kinds of motives, bound motive and free motive. Bound motive is integral to the story, whereas the free motive can be substituted at any point of time. And I would also like you to read my questions on this side. Questions the formalist ask. This is very important. അത് സ്ക്രീൻഷോട്ട് എടുത്ത് നോക്കാം. ഇതാണ് അവർ ചോദിക്കുന്ന ചോദ്യങ്ങൾ. Now coming to questions, I have 15 questions in this slide and maybe another 5 in the next slide. Formalism is an area we expect all three kinds of questions: short question, paragraph, and essay. These are the 5 more questions and 6 paragraph questions. And you also expect a essay question from formalism, which I have not, maybe the Russian form, the different concepts of formalism, or write an essay on formalism, or a very general question you get. So you can also expect essay questions from this. You have to be, you have to, I mean, maybe if you get a essay question, you have to say what is the concept of formalism, literariness, defamiliarization, fabula and societe, motivation, foregrounding. All this you have to explain in a paragraph by paragraph. Then that becomes a essay. So thank you for watching us today. Now back to you, Dr. Premanand.
Thank you, Dr. Prasanth. And it was a wonderful explanation about formalism, Russian formalism, fabula, sujet, and all those things. And I hope you've also understood well. Please do read it. As I always say, read it, understand, and perfect yourself so that you will be able to get very good marks. There will be short answers definitely coming from this area. So till tomorrow, next class.
Monday.
Yeah, Monday, sorry, Monday. For you all, next edition also, suppose you're watching offline, please do subscribe, please do comment, and please do give us a like. Thank you very much, and see you.